Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for being with us on this last session of today's program. As mentioned, I'm Panagiota Dafniotis. I'm a partner at Dentons, and I am the national lead for intellectual property here in Canada. As I was, over the last day and a half, I've been talking to a few of you and promoting our panel today just to maximize attendance. And some of you were asking me about the topic, and I explained that it was about intellectual property and cybersecurity. And on a number of occasions, a few individuals said, that's kind of interesting. I'm not sure I would have thought about intellectual property when thinking about cybersecurity, and vice versa. Hence the timeliness of this panel. We've heard a lot over the course of the last day and a half about the importance of innovation, investing in innovation, time and resources for companies to develop these important technologies and support corporate growth. And yet, the focus of cyber attacks has mainly been, and sort of the attention and understanding of it, has mainly been about personal data breaches, without much of a spotlight on what else can be part of this cyber threat and theft. And intellectual property is certainly an area of risk for organizations. So whether we're talking about in this vulnerability, whether we're talking about, sensitive information that's required to duplicate complicated engineering, data, blueprints for cutting-edge technology, algorithms, formula, and the list goes on and on. These are really valuable corporate assets in this intangibles economy, in this digital world that we operate in, and protecting them against theft, is a sort of mission critical concern for many companies. And so with that, just sort of to tee it up, we have a great panel here today. And what I really like about our panel here today is we have a number of individuals with very sort of sufficiently different roles and perspectives on this particular topic. And so to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, I'd ask each of them, starting with Nicolas, to talk a little bit about their current role and how cybersecurity and intellectual property play into their day-to-day.
Merci. Donc, mon nom est Nicolas Duguay. Je suis directeur développement des marchés et des programmes de cybersécurité chez INSECEM. INSECEM, c'est la grappe nationale de la cybersécurité. Donc, essentiellement, c'est une organisation qui a été créée quelques années déjà, en 2017, à la suggestion du Conseil national de recherche Canada, qui voulait doter l'écosystème canadien de la cybersécurité à l'époque d'un véhicule pour accroître la cohésion dans cet écosystème-là, s'assurer de casser les silos, s'assurer que les gens aient plus des occasions de faire des partenariats. Donc, c'est vraiment le mandat initial de INSECEM. De plus, on est considéré comme un des bras opérationnels des gouvernements canadiens et les gouvernements provinciaux pour concevoir et ou livrer des programmes de cybersécurité. À cet effet, parlant de propriété intellectuelle, INSECEM a le plaisir et l'honneur, en fait, de gérer le plus gros programme de protection de propriété intellectuelle pour les PME innovantes canadiennes dans le cadre du PARI, en fait, le programme d'aide à la recherche industrielle. On a des visites interactives qui nous permettent de donner un coup de pouce à un tas d'entreprises canadiennes qui développent de la propriété intellectuelle. Pour vous donner une idée, l'an dernier seulement, on a pu aider à peu près 2000 petites PME là, innovantes là, pour accroître leur cybersécurité, leur capacité de résister aux cybercriminels.
Merci. Peter?
So I represent an organization called AI Sweden, which is the National Center for Applied AI in Sweden. But I'm based here in Montreal to learn and share knowledge about the ever-developing AI ecosystem, you could say. And talking about cybersecurity in the world of AI, we talked about it a lot, but that has really accelerated over the last half year, since especially the release of ChatGPT and generative AI models. It's been very clear for us working in the field that this is a new type of technology that will spur a new type of use, on both sides of the cybersecurity aspects. So obviously, we will need to use AI models and generative AI models to produce new information, new data. So that is really relatable to the IP structure. But then again, we will also know that we will have bad actors using this very groundbreaking technology that will shape the future of a lot of industries for bad usage. We heard panels here yesterday talking about cyber threats as a new industry that will have a revenue of about $10.5 trillion yearly, bigger than the global drug market. So it will have an immense impact. And what we are scared of and afraid of as a national center is the low levels of awareness that how this technology will be used and the competency that is out there, especially in small and medium-sized enterprises, so that there's a big gap. So in my role as the head of operations at AI Sweden, I work with partially technology development, but also looking at how companies and organizations, both private and public sector, is adopting the technology. Because it's all about raising awareness, raising the knowledge internally, but also raising awareness about how others, both good and bad actors, are using the technology. So, for example, I'm working with the Swedish Armed Forces right now, looking at flows of information coming from and to Sweden, and how they will protect our nation in a ever-changing cyber environment. So it's on all aspects.
That's great. Tyson?
Good afternoon, everyone. Tyson Johnson, the CISO here at Uni Financial, a federally regulated credit union based in the east coast of Canada. My journey there has taken me through national security at the public sector level and then into private sector and financial services, advanced manufacturing, supporting telecoms. And then had a chance to work with Nicolas on a previous iteration of my career, working to help drive collaboration for innovation for critical infrastructure protection between industry, government, and academia in New Brunswick. As the CISO at Uni, the banking sector is becoming more and more agile. And the goal is to drive maturity in cybersecurity, ensuring resilience of operations, resilience in how we manage operations and support it. Cybersecurity now as a horizontal across the organization to support the different business verticals. But then the complexity of what's happening in the IP space and how we integrate with so many different third-party suppliers as well to generate our products and services and how we deliver our products. So my ultimate goal is to continue to mature the organization, educate and update and train the board of directors and the senior executive team so they become more aware of our current situation and where we need to go as an organization.
Bonjour, Jean-François de Rico, je suis associé chez KPMG en service conseil dans l'équipe de cybersécurité, protection des données, risques technologiques. Alors, mais avant de me joindre à une firme de service conseil, j'étais avocat en propriété intellectuelle et en technologie de l'information. Alors, j'ai essentiellement œuvré dans les deux domaines qui nous occupent aujourd'hui. Puis l'angle avec lequel je m'intéresse plus particulièrement au sujet aujourd'hui, c'est que parmi la menace, il y a des attaquants qui s'intéressent à de la propriété intellectuelle, à du secret de commerce. Ça, c'est une évidence pour tout le monde, mais c'est vrai qu'on entend plus parler des attaques qui entraînent des exfiltrations de données personnelles, mais il y a réellement des attaques qui vont cibler, souvent de la part de la menace nation state. Et dès lors, les organisations qui définissent leur stratégie doivent tenir compte de cet actif-là. Souvent, on va le classer dans les crown jewels dans l'organisation. Et parfois des stratégies différentes. Heureusement, les investisseurs, les gens qui tiennent les cordons de la bourse de private equity s'intéressent désormais à ce risque-là et donc ça entraîne, ça le met à l'agenda des organisations.
Merci. Nicolas, parlons un peu des petites et moyennes entreprises plus à fond. En particulier, peut-on entendre ton feedback, ton point de vue sur les besoins uniques et les risques uniques des petites et moyennes entreprises en propriété intellectuelle et cybersecurity?
Ben, en fait, on peut se poser la question, qui au Canada est les plus gros générateurs de propriété intellectuelle? La réponse est tout simple, ce sont des startups, ce sont des PME qui, à chaque jour, ce sont eux les véritables moteurs de la capacité canadienne à innover, à développer des nouvelles technologies. Et ce sont, d'un point de vue cybersécurité, donc des cibles de choix pour les cybercriminels et des entreprises qui sont aussi, et c'est ce qui est le plus tragique, des entreprises qui sont aussi très démunies en termes de capacité de cyberprotection. Donc, si on pose la question au niveau des besoins, les besoins sont immenses, mais les besoins sont très basiques, en fait. On a tendance, des fois, à regarder les solutions qui sont les plus, je vous dirais, les plus jazzy, les plus sexy. Là, on parle de cryptographie quantique, on parle de plein de concepts qui sont super intéressants intellectuellement, mais sur le plancher des vaches, pour protéger la propriété intellectuelle canadienne, sachant que on parle de petites et moyennes organisations, souvent des toutes petites organisations, on est vraiment un niveau plus bas. Là. On est vraiment au niveau vraiment de la maturité de base. On est à des besoins très basiques de se doter, ne serait-ce que d'une compréhension montée, ce que nous, on appelle à l'interne chez INSECM, de la maturité numérique en cybersécurité. En fait, faut accroître ça parce que c'est de cette façon-là qu'on va, je vous dirais, protéger au mieux le plus grand pourcentage de la surface d'attaque des PME, en fait.
Merci. Tyson, if I can ask you, with your experience, sort of public-private sector in a regulated industry, that's unique in itself for many different reasons, and so maybe you can talk to us a little bit of what are your key areas of focus in this space.
Sure, and I'll say that to Nicholas's comment. The irony is that a lot of organizations now, we follow the U.S. NIST cybersecurity framework. It's one of the global standards, and then there's a maturity between 1 and 5. And a lot of the PMOs, the startups, they're at a 1 or less than a 1 because they don't have the money, the time, the investment, and the resources to get to maturity. That exposes them, right? So for us as a regulated organization, and like many in the crowd from energy and different sectors, we have no choice, and it's actually baked into your business case. So for us, early in the career, you'd argue IP was more like you said, it was a recipe, or it was a bill of materials, or it was some engineering drawing that was locked into a safe, or saved onto a hard drive that was encrypted and put into a safe. Now, for us, what's complex for us now is in fintech and in financial institutions is the level of integration, not just within your organization, but with third-party suppliers, vendors. And nth party. So we've had breaches recently in the media that have been nth party suppliers where they have access to our sensitive data for our customers. They're not our customers on paper, but there's products that have been provided. So for us, we imagine now the kind of data governance, data protection mandate in an organization. Not only do you have to protect, first of all, identify and figure out where you have sensitive data, where you have IP. A lot of organizations can't do that to start, so that's number one. But then when you figured it out, is you have to then not only protect it, make it available, and continue to make it trusted data within your organization, but then how do you trust that when you provide it to a supplier for processing, or when you leverage analytics from another supplier, that analytics engine is fair, unbiased, not poisoned, etc. So you have your own internal journey, but then you also have the external journeys of your third parties. So for us, like as an example, I know the model issue is coming out. So for us, OSFI, Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, they've just published two really interesting documents. One is an update to one of their guidelines on risk management of models. So how do you prove that you're managing the models? But the second one that's interesting is they have this annual outlook. And for 2023, 2024, they have a digital innovation outlook. And in there, it's basically around AI ML. So usually when they issue an outlook, the next question they're going to ask you formally is, can you show us how you're securing your models and how you're maintaining a level of security on your intellectual property, AKA your AI models. So we're actually, it's funny that actually there's a startup called Troj AI that we're working with that's gone through the Techstars AI incubator here in Montreal, based in New Brunswick. And we're working with them on capability to do kind of a secure model development lifecycle review, and also look at secure containerization of your AI and ML once it's been created so that it's not poisoned or biased, etc. Because I think, as you said at the start, some of the threats, it's not about the information loss or the big breach or the hack. It's about nuanced changes in how you manage your data, changes in algorithms that could skew how we give out credit or how we don't give out credit or how we make decisions on products going forward. So, and you can take that into the agricultural space and changes to how decisions are made in an algorithm to put fertilizer on crops to potentially reduce crop harvests and damage. So there's a million things that could happen that are not out in the public, that are not kind of sexy TV news, but could do a lot of damage to the main challenges that we're facing in the space.
Okay. So let's talk about AI. I mean, you touched on that, Tyson. So Peter, you're living, your day-to-day in that space. You have a lot of experience building and working on international collaborations in AI ecosystems. So maybe just talk to us about, in a little more depth and a little, what you're sort of seeing and what your experience in this space is.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting dynamic right now happening all around the world. We're having big tech focusing on pushing for the need for the regulatory space to advance faster. And then again, we're having discussions back in Europe where we're pushing the regulatory space, but we're not pushing the technology development. And that's one of the reasons why I'm based here in Canada, is really to look at what's going on in the North American ecosystem, and especially in terms of the fantastic and excellent research in the AI space here in Canada. But what we have in Sweden is a huge need from an industry perspective. We have global leaders. We're really punching above our weight class in terms of the impact we have on industry with IKEA, Volvo, Ericsson, ABB, Scania, and I can mention a lot of them. But the problem is that we need research and technological development that is on par with their impact for the rest of the world. So this space, even if we need to have, that was discussed yesterday about the zero trust policies, like zero trust aspect of how we approach data security and cybersecurity and data governance, we still need partners. We still need to build ecosystems, and we need global partnership in this development. So it's really interesting when it comes to what will really IP be in the world of machine learning and the world where we deploy global AI models, because we know that we won't be able to share data all over the globe. So we're trying to push technological development where we only share insights rather than we share models rather than data. And those models will belong to someone, either a startup or a medium-sized, or being discussed on a global level right now, is the allocation of capital and the allocation of acquiring startups quite early on in the aspects, because as we've heard during these days, data will become more and more expensive because it has more and more value, so it will become expensive. One way to tackle that is to acquire startups that acquire data. And from a Swedish perspective and a Canadian perspective, in terms of the small and medium-sized enterprises right now, what we're not seeing is a plan for how to keep these startups or scale-ups Canadian or Swedish. We have huge acquisitions coming into the field of life science, into cybersecurity, for example, American companies. And it's Canadian tax dollars, it's Canadian, both federal and provincial money that goes into investing in these companies, because in Canada, we want to create new Canadian superstars, and in Sweden, we want to create new Swedish superstars, but we're dependent on often either Asian capital or American capital. And often the IP we develop in these companies and the IP we're protecting and the data we are protecting ends up, when it has a high value, in American hands. So we need to have strategies to keep the IP in Canada or in Sweden for as long as possible. We want global leaders, but then we need to invest in this and increase the level of maturity in these companies to ensure that they stay relevant in terms of data governance, and so that they keep IP for as long as possible. And for that to happen, we need international collaboration.
Right. And collaboration is a theme we've been hearing a lot about over the last day and a half. And so I wanted to just pop back over to the discussion on SMEs. There is data. There is certainly an established line of thinking that the connection between IP and SMEs is directly related to their potential for growth and success. I think there's certainly a case to be made for that. And Nicolas, si je peux te demander sur la question de cyber preparedness, je sais pas comment le dire en français, mais la préparation des petites et moyennes entreprises pour des situations de menaces cyber. Est-ce que tu peux nous donner encore un peu de ton perspective sur quel niveau de préparation est adéquat ou sera requis?
Oui, certainement. Je voudrais juste revenir sur un petit truc ici, ce que tu as mentionné, qui est super intéressant au niveau de la capacité des organisations canadiennes de conserver, en fait, la capacité du Canada, en fait, de conserver la propriété intellectuelle qu'on développe. Le Conseil national de recherche, qui est un de nos partenaires, finance à coups de millions la création de propriété intellectuelle canadienne, d'innovation canadienne, et effectivement, on voit souvent, lorsqu'il y a une espèce de courbe, en fait, on voit les startups, et à l'étape scale-up, on manque souvent un peu, je vous dirais, de gaz là ici pour aller plus loin, et c'est à ce moment-là qu'on perd des bijoux, en fait, littéralement, et c'est quelque chose qu'effectivement, on n'a pas de solution là pour à vous proposer, mais c'est effectivement quelque chose qu'on constate. Je sais qu'il y a des projets au niveau du fédéral de se doter d'un bras d'investissement pour des technologies de cybersécurité qui sont considérées comme stratégiques pour le Canada, en fait, un peu à la InQtel, en fait, ce qu'on retrouve aux États-Unis depuis quelques années. Il y a quelque chose dans les cartons actuellement qui se dessine au niveau fédéral canadien. Est-ce que ça sera suffisant? Est-ce que ça va changer la donne? Bonne question. En fait, je suis très intéressé de voir les choses aller. Maintenant, pour le côté preparedness, effectivement, la première chose, en fait, puis je réitère ce que je disais tout à l'heure, c'est important que les dirigeants de start-up comprennent, en fait, prennent conscience de la dangerosité, le côté très délétère de l'environnement actuel en matière de cybermenaces. On a de plus en plus de séances de sensibilisation. Puis je pense que c'est vraiment la première étape. Et c'est ce qu'on a fait. On a fait un test avec le Conseil national de recherche où on constatait que il y avait beaucoup de projets d'accompagnement pour accroître la maturité numérique des organisations qui échouaient parce que les entreprises ne comprenaient pas. Maintenant, ce qu'on a fait, on a imposé avec le Conseil national, dans le cadre du pari, une simple séance de sensibilisation de 90 minutes. Donc, individuellement, toute entreprise qui fait de la recherche industrielle au Canada doit obtenir d'un expert un 90 minutes de sensibilisation où on leur parle tout simplement de cybersécurité en dédramatisant, en expliquant, en positionnant les choses. Et sincèrement, ça fait toute la différence. Donc, compréhension de l'environnement, c'est la première étape. Deuxième étape, c'est aussi de savoir aussi quoi identifier comme priorité. On a en cybersécurité, malheureusement, un environnement où il y a beaucoup je vous dirais je cherche une façon de le dire politically correct, en fait, mais de vendeurs de portes blindées, en fait. Je vous le dirais de cette façon-là, pour des entreprises où c'est overkill, en fait. Ça ne sert à rien de vendre des portes blindées à des organisations qui laissent, sans le savoir, les fenêtres ouvertes. Donc, ce qu'on essaie de convaincre aux gens, c'est tout simplement de leur dire, apprenez à fermer vos fenêtres et après, peut-être, vous allez envisager l'achat d'une porte blindée. Peut-être que ça sera pas nécessaire. Donc, y aller étape par étape, très, très basic, d'appliquer des baselines en cybersécurité comme ce qu'on a avec la certification cybersécuritaire Canada, qui est une certification qui a été mise en place par le gouvernement fédéral, par ICED, qui a, je vous dirais, une quinzaine de contrôles de cybersécurité qui sont hyper pertinent pour la majorité des petites et moyennes organisations en date d'aujourd'hui. C'est la première étape. La deuxième étape, après la troisième étape, après, c'est de comprendre que la cybersécurité, c'est quoi? La cybersécurité, c'est d'abord et avant tout une problématique de gouvernance. C'est une problématique de ressources humaines. Donc, il faut impliquer l'aspect humain. Et c'est accessoirement une problématique technologique. Donc, si on a compris ça, je vous dirais, en termes de preparedness, on est un petit peu mieux qu'au début.
Right. And so you mentioned governance. We're going to sort of dovetail onto that and I think talk a little bit about risk management, which is, of course, key to preparedness. And sort of the risk management blind spots that organizations can have, including, and Tyson, you mentioned this earlier, it's not just about your internal sort of, I'll call it governance or processes or procedures, but those of your third parties that you work with and fourth parties and so on. So vendors of your vendors and the relationships and the impact sort of continues down the line. So maybe Jean-François, I can ask you to talk to us a little bit about sort of risk management, third party relationships and sort of your perspectives.
Yeah, so third-party risk management is inherent because it's seldom the case that an organization will be able to develop significant value on its own. At least it has, oftentimes at some point in time in development project, you'll have to resort to a third party. It may be just a solution provider, but it may more likely be human resources and specific knowledge or expertise that you need to call upon. So that's self-evident. Now, nobody aims a situation of risk zero. It's always inherent, but there are ways to mitigate that risk. And in the course of a third-party risk management approach, first and foremost, and we'll get a chance to discuss this, it has to be proportional. It's not proportional to the size of the organization. It's proportional to the value of the information. And the value information translates into higher risks when it's very valuable because third parties will be interested. And Nicolas just mentioned the level of awareness, which is usually translated by actual effective training, recurrent training in an organization, attribution of roles and responsibilities pertaining to cybersecurity as a whole discipline or domain. Is one of the main aspects, and the absence thereof is a red flag, regardless of the extent of the technology that's being deployed. So, what I perceive as a shift, or not a shift, an evolution, is that organizations are moving away from being satisfied by contractual undertakings and if they're not doing it now, they're looking for ways to move towards actual validation discussions with a prospective vendor or service provider, which I usually use the expression, open the hood. I need to know what you're actually doing. Now, that may sound like magical thinking, but oftentimes, if you're not willing to go that step further, you may need to consider alternatives to using or transferring actual access or even control to certain pieces of data, or even giving away development responsibilities. Because the magical thinking expression, I just mean by that oftentimes we have theoretical models to third-party risk management that businesses don't have the means to implement, but just do it with the right pieces of informational assets is the key. And that allows me to circle back, third-party risk management will be interested in validating how the internal threat is considered in third parties, and that's a fundamental element. IP directed attacks will often use internal and resources of an organization in order to. It's not only technological. They'll corrupt, they'll manipulate. So the way that the individuals inside an organizations are trained, but also, security checked at the point of employment is very fundamental. And it's true not only obviously for your third parties, but for yourself. So I guess in a nutshell, move away from purely documentary validation to actual, validation of processes and procedures. and actual training.
And I think it's worth sort of highlighting that, I mean, we know that IP theft is not new, right? This isn't something that's just happening now, but in the sort of, the way that this would occur in the past would be some sort of, maybe a disgruntled employee leaving with documents or leaving with a prototype or something on a disk. And there was sort of a physical environment to control what was valuable and important to the company. And of course, we all know we're now in this digital world, and sort of the surface area for attack is much greater. And I think in terms of whether we're thinking about risk management or governance or whatever it is a shift in mindset and understanding that those physical, I'll call them protections that existed, are no longer there. And it's really, looking under the hood and examining processes and the handling of data and information and development and so on that really are those protections that existed in different ways in the past. And so it sort of, stands out to me as a bit of a mindset shift that is required as well. So it might be interesting to just talk a little bit about trends in terms of what we're seeing, whether we're seeing those in Canada, North America, or elsewhere. Quite frankly, it's interesting to have perspectives from different regions. One trend maybe I'll start off with that's probably sort of pure IP, if I could say it that way, is that increasingly, and probably increasingly is not the right word, but it is very common to find companies of all sizes, but particularly smaller companies in startup or scaling mode, to say that they are protecting their intellectual property through trade secret protection. And there are many kinds of IP that that kind of protection makes sense. But a trade secret is not a trade secret just because you want it to be a trade secret. You really have to take specific measures to protect it and keep it secret in order for it to be a trade secret. And so I think about that as a trend in terms of an increased use of, let's say, the form of protection from an IP perspective. And I add that to everything that the panelists have talked about here in terms of the vulnerability of companies and the threat that that cybersecurity presents. Really to bring those two together to highlight why this continues to be such a hot area and threat for companies. So maybe with that, Tyson, I can ask you to talk to us a little bit about what sort of trends or other red flags you might be seeing.
Certainly.
Yeah.
There's many of them. So we'll start from kind of top down and inside the organization, and we'll go outside. So one of the interesting trends, and it's funny, we were joking before this session that the hydrogen conversation is so new. That sounds like cybersecurity about 10 years ago. But what's ironic is that the U.S. SEC is about to put into into action. They will now require the indication of board-level cybersecurity competence among publicly traded entities. That's a quantum change from where we were 10, 15 years ago when they didn't really want to hear from you and we were, relegated to the data centers or the basements of organizations. And now it's, what's your level of boardroom competency? So that's a major shift, which is a great shift. The next one that I think we see a lot, or I've seen a lot of in my career, and we're seeing a lot of it kind of between, like in the financial institutions as well, is data governance above all. You cannot properly defend your data or your organization or your IP if you don't even know what you have. We had an interesting presentation from our third-party counsel to our senior executive, and they basically said, can someone here please provide me with your data map? And the blank stares and the points across the room, do you have that? Do I have that? And we take for granted sometimes, we think someone's looking after that. But there needs to be, and it's actually one of the key pillars of the NIST CSF framework, is third-party risk management, data governance. Everything is required. And so if you're not doing it today, you might want to take that back and ask the question, who's doing it and what are we doing about it? It needs to mature in an organization. Arguably, it is probably the least mature control in most organizations. And that's a trend that I think it needs to change, because We're making it easy for the bad guys. We're making it easy for data to walk out or data to get manipulated or algorithms to get because you can't validate what's under control. You mentioned it too, like the ability to lock down access and make sure access is reasonable based on the data. You have to have the data map. You have to know what you have. It's ironic, you were talking about trade secrets. And I remember years ago having conversations with executives and we were talking about how if you're leaving sensitive data in your top drawer unlocked, it gets the classification of the least classified document in that drawer. So if it's in there with yesterday's newspaper, that's the value of what you just put in that top drawer. Think about that now from a logical data perspective. If you're not protecting the crown jewels, the IP, in a manner that indicates you're aware that it's IP, it's not going to be looked favorably. That then gets into third-party risk management, which I think is probably the most important external trend. The ability to monitor third parties on due diligence, but also after due diligence, and things like be really careful if you put a right to audit clause in your contract, because that partner has a really significant role to play in managing and doing analytics on your sensitive data to drive back value. If you ask for a right to audit and think that you've won the day because you put in a strong contractual T's and C's, you better also audit, because if not, the courts may see it as, well, you had a right to audit, you actually didn't execute it, so what value did you actually put on the data that you said that they were managing for you? Those are the big trends that we're seeing right now.
Right. And on the due diligence side, it's certainly an area that a focus for companies on the acquiring or investment side. So Peter, maybe your thoughts.
But to follow up on that, what Tyson said is that these surfaces are getting bigger and bigger in terms of what we can get out of organizations in terms of phishing attacks and so on. And the tools are getting more and more sophisticated. So we're talking about third parties here, but also first parties in terms of the employees of your own organization, that I can now fake to be your CEO or your boss and take contact with you in the manner that they would take contact with you. Not only by email, but I can also call you with their voice, with the new AI tools, to get out trade secrets and to get you to transfer trade secrets to me. So we're having a larger and larger toolbox for bad actors. And if I'm a bad actor and I want to attack someone, I want the door. I want to go into the most vulnerable house, basically the one without a security alarm, the one without a security system, and that will be probably the small and medium-sized enterprises. So I'm still surprised to that point that we still, at some point in the organizational or company journey, you will obviously have like a human resource department. But we still don't have chief data officers in our medium-sized enterprises. And in most organizations, in a lot of organizations, the data you have is more important and more valuable than your employees. At least like most of your employees. So we need a better mindset to protect that, because the tools are here. I don't know if you've checked AutoGPT, God Mode, all of these tools that have spurred out of the transformer models that has been out for more like about 8 months now. But those tools are very early on and they're super powerful right now. So we need to help our our business ecosystems, the private sector and the public sector, to be able to protect themselves from these attacks. And it starts with data governance, for sure.
Yeah. Jean-François?
We spend a lot of energy on knowing our client and KYC procedures. We spend energy on knowing our vendors. We need to spend energy on knowing our data and informational assets. And I can't help to mention that, take for granted that your employees are using, AI right now, even though you have a policy on the internet that says they shouldn't use ChatGPT with corporate data or client data. Take for granted they are, and find a way to rein it in. I mean, they're going to use it. So manage the access to information you do not want to be made publicly available, and think about how you're going to allow your resources to introduce those tools in your environments. I mean, it's not there's not a big offering, but there is an offering to deploy, the AI models into logical instances controlled by businesses. Now, so I'm moving away, but so the importance of culture regarding data is very important, because you can develop policies, but those policies that will say, use the functionality of the word, or no, I don't want to say a product, but a document creation tool to validate and indicate and classify it. Use that. People have to understand the importance of it and why you're asking them to do it, because otherwise you will get lost in translation and, moving away from, we have value, but we don't really know where it is, and the truth of the matter is that we're all relying on IT, and we've been doing so for at least 25 years, but the culture of adequately classifying, categorizing information has not, translated from people that used to work in libraries and archives. So, technology can help make it faster, but you have to explain it to individuals and make it part of the job, a cost of doing business.
Nicolas?
J'abonderais dans le même sens que ce qui a été dit, en fait. Ce qu'on constate comme tendance, en fait, trend la plus évidente dans l'environnement de la cybersécurité, la cybersécurité, soit dit en passant, ce n'est rien d'autre que la sécurisation d'une transformation numérique. En fait, il faut vraiment se rapporter à cet environnement-là. Notre société est en mode transformation numérique à grande vitesse. Donc, la cybersécurité est tout simplement une conséquence, une obligation. Ce qu'on constate actuellement, c'est, je le dirais d'une façon très claire, en fait, c'est la fin de la candeur, en fait. Il y a, c'est comme ça qu'on le voit, sincèrement, parce qu'il y a eu longtemps, et malheureusement, c'est encore le cas, là, on le constate dans beaucoup d'entreprises canadiennes, particulièrement au Canada, c'est peut-être une question culturelle, je sais pas, mais il y a une candeur naturelle, en fait, une confiance qui se fait, ou qui s'installe, où ça rend nos entreprises particulièrement vulnérables, en fait. On parlait tout à l'heure de soft target, en fait, là, dans le jargon militaire ou de renseignement, c'est ce qu'on va viser d'emblée, c'est une cible molle, en fait, donc une cible moins solide, et c'est souvent les PME, effectivement, à cause notamment, on a parlé tout à l'heure de l'absence de moyens, mais aussi de la candeur dont je parle maintenant, en fait. Et qu'est-ce qui est en train de se produire au niveau des organisations gouvernementales ou les titulaires de tout ce qui est législatif ou réglementaire, c'est de durcir l'environnement, en fait. Donc, on a vu, par exemple, ici au Québec, un incident de cybersécurité majeur, en fait, où Desjardins s'est fait breacher, où la moitié probablement de la salle ici a vu ses données personnelles circuler un peu partout. Un an plus tard, le gouvernement du Québec arrivait avec la loi 25. Donc, c'est une réponse directe à ce qui s'est produit pour forcer l'adoption de bonnes pratiques en matière de capacité de protection des renseignements personnels des citoyens québécois. Là, pendant la pandémie, durant un été, durant juste le mois de juillet, je crois c'est 2020, tous les laboratoires canadiens à Montréal, qui travaillaient sur une réponse à la pandémie, donc développer un vaccin ou périphérie, un vaccin contre la COVID, se sont fait breacher par un acteur étatique étranger. C'est le genre d'événement qui impose l'obligation de normes, de standards, donc, c'est comme je vous mentionne, c'est la fin de la candeur, c'est la tendance observée actuellement. On voit les chaînes d'approvisionnement exiger de leurs sous-traitants des standards minimums en cybersécurité. Aux États-Unis, ils l'ont fait avec le CMMC pour le secteur de la défense, où maintenant on doit avoir vraiment un ensemble de bonnes pratiques, de standards minimum à être respecté. Le gouvernement canadien a annoncé la semaine dernière à peu près arriver avec un équivalent de CMMC pour son propre secteur de la défense. Des secteurs financiers commencent à l'imposer. Je pense qu'on peut, dans le secteur financier, c'est une réalité. Donc, c'est la tendance principale. On va commencer à imposer des standards de cybersécurité parce que le volontariat a démontré ses limites, en fait.
Merci, Nicolas. I think this is a great place to wrap it up. I mean, I think if you were going to jot down a few quick points, what I heard here today is, first of all, know your intellectual property, build a culture that understands the importance of protecting your data and your IP, governance, and risk management, including third-party due diligence. And finally, I think the point on training is a theme that's been present throughout many of the other topics in this conference. So I just want to thank our panelists for sharing their insights with us, and thank all of you for spending your time with us at the end of your day and joining us for this panel. Thank you.